didn't plan to work nights. Life has a way of steering you into places you never meant to go. And somehow, that led me to the highway diner on the edge of nowhere, the kind of place you drive past a dozen times without thinking twice. Until one night, you find yourself staring at its flickering neon sign, like it's calling you by name. I took the job mostly for the money, though I'd like to tell myself it was curiosity. Maybe it was both. The first thing I noticed about the diner was how quiet it was, even for the middle of the night. Out there, beyond the glow of the neon, the highway hummed with cars I couldn't quite hear, and the wind carried a kind of emptiness that made the lights inside feel fragile. The door chimed softly when I walked in, though the sound seemed louder than it had any right to be, echoing in the space between the booths. My boss, if you could call him that, was waiting behind the counter, a man of uncertain age, with a face like it had been carved from stone. But his eyes moved too quickly, darting at things you didn't notice. He didn't smile, didn't welcome me. He just nodded, as if acknowledging my presence was enough. That's when I realized, slowly, that this wasn't a diner you wandered into by accident. Somehow, it demanded that you belonged. The air smelled of coffee, bleach, and something else, something faint, metallic, almost like iron. I didn't ask about it. I didn't need to. Everything about the place made me feel like I had stepped into a world slightly off from the one I knew. The booths were empty, save for a few scattered napkins, a ketchup bottle left and yet, I could feel it. A kind of watching. I told myself it was the wind, the flickering lights, anything but what it was. I spent the first hour learning the layout, mostly avoiding eye contact with the man behind the counter. There was a back room, a fridge humming too loudly, a cash register that seemed to have its own heartbeat. Then, just as I was starting to settle in, I noticed him, the first customer of my first night. A man at the end booth, who'd pulled low, hands folded over a cup of coffee. He didn't move, didn't speak. I could feel him, though, like the air around him had weight, pressing against my skin. I tried to tell myself he was waiting for someone, or that he was tired, or any ordinary explanation I could manage. But something about the way he stared, though I couldn't see his eyes, made the diner feel smaller, the shadows closer. I told myself to ignore it. I told myself I was imagining things. And yet, as I poured the first cup of coffee that night, I heard it. A soft scratching from the back room, like fingernails over metal. My heartbeat jumped, but the man at the booth didn't flinch. He sat perfectly still, waiting, patient. That was when I realized, there are places that take more than your labor. Places that watch you, measure you, even before you know the rules. I didn't know the rules yet. I didn't know what I was stepping into, but somewhere, deep in the hum of the fluorescent lights and the distant highway wind, I felt them settling over me, invisible and insistent. I had no choice but to begin. The next night, I arrived earlier, trying to calm the strange knot in my chest from the previous evening. The neon sign buzzed in the same uneven rhythm, and the wind carried that same emptiness, brushing against the edges of my jacket like it wanted to push me back. The diner door chimed as I entered, soft and deliberate. Inside, the air was warmer, heavier, almost like it had weight, and the faint metallic smell lingered. The man behind the counter, my so-called boss, was already there, polishing a coffee cup with meticulous precision. He glanced up, eyes catching mine for the briefest moment, and nodded. First time in, you learn the rules. Second time, you see why they exist, he said, his voice low, careful, almost like he was reciting something sacred. I nodded, though I didn't understand. He gestured to a small clipboard on the counter. I picked it up, the paper crinkling in my hands. 7 rules were written, each underlined and numbered, though the ink looked faded, as if it had been rewritten dozens of times. I read them quietly, trying to ignore the way my stomach tightened with each one. Never serve the first cup before the clock strikes midnight. Never speak the customer's name. If he offers one, Do not leave the counter for any reason. During his visit, never look directly at him when he enters. Do not let the lights flicker for more than 3 seconds. Never write down what you see. It will disappear. Always leave the back door unlocked, even if no one enters. I blinked, staring at the list. These aren't normal diner rules, I said, almost laughing to keep the unease at bay. He didn't laugh. They're not meant to be normal, he said simply. They're meant to keep things from noticing you, keep you safe, if you can follow them. Safe. The word stuck in my mind, but it didn't calm me. Instead, it made the diner feel colder, though the heater hummed. I glanced at the empty booths, the glossy floor, the stainless steel counter reflecting my own pale face back at me, and tried to imagine what things might notice. The first night had already shown me the man at the end booth. Now, the rules made me understand he wasn't just a customer. He was something else, something patient, unblinking, and aware of everything. Even the simple act of looking at him might be a mistake I couldn't undo. I spent the next hour learning how the rules affected the diner. The coffee machine needed precise timing. The lights had to be observed constantly. The back door unlocked but never opened unless explicitly instructed. My fingers trembled slightly as I practiced pouring a cup of coffee just before midnight. Then again, stopping myself, waiting, learning the rhythm. It was like learning a dance I couldn't see, one where a single misstep could trigger something I didn't want to understand. He, the man, arrived at exactly midnight, as if the world itself had bent to his schedule. I kept my gaze down, focusing on the steam rising from the cup. The hum of the fridge, the soft scrape of my apron against the counter. I could feel him though. Every subtle shift, every barely audible movement made the air heavier, pressing against me. My heart tried to pick up pace, but I forced it down, focusing on the rules. He didn't speak, didn't flinch, didn't even seem to breathe. I handed him the first cup of coffee after midnight, my hand steady, despite the tremor in my chest. The lights flickered for half a second, and I immediately corrected it, adjusting the dimmer, holding my breath as the man's shadow remained perfectly still at the booth. Time passed slowly, each minute stretching unnaturally. I began to understand. These rules weren't arbitrary. They were survival measures. They were boundaries, invisible walls keeping whatever this man was contained, or perhaps keeping me contained. And as the night deepened, as the highway hummed faintly outside, and the neon buzzed, I realized the diner had its own pulse, a rhythm that matched his. That measured my obedience. By the end of the night, I had memorized the rules, repeated them silently to myself like a prayer. But deep down, I knew memorizing them didn't mean I understood them. Something watched, and it waited. I was learning, yes, but not fast enough. And I had the nagging feeling that tonight, something would test me as I cleaned the last counter, wiping down surfaces and arranging napkins with careful precision. I heard the faintest scratch from the back room. I froze. It wasn't the first time I had heard it, but tonight it felt closer, sharper. And then, almost imperceptibly, I felt a glance, or perhaps a presence, slide along the back of my neck. I didn't turn. I didn't break the rules. Not yet. But I knew I would. It started the way all mistakes begin, small, almost imperceptible. I was halfway through my second week on the night shift, still memorizing the rules like a prayer, repeating them under my breath to steady my nerves. The diner hummed around me, lights buzzing, coffee machine hissing, the highway wind pressing faintly against the windows. The man was there, as always, seated in the same booth at the same time, silent, patient, watching. I was cleaning a spill near the counter, a puddle of syrup from a careless pour, when my elbow brushed the light switch. The flicker lasted longer than 3 seconds. My stomach dropped. I froze, waiting for some kind of response, a noise, a movement, a shift in the air, but nothing happened. I told myself it was fine. I told myself I had corrected it quickly enough, and then I heard it. A soft, almost inaudible scrape from the back room, like fingernails on metal, but deliberate, slow, deliberate enough to make my blood run cold. I had obeyed the rule, hadn't I? I had fixed the lights, and yet the sound persisted, curling into the corners of the diner, wrapping around the booths, pressing against the floor beneath my shoes. I tried to focus on the coffee machine, trying to pour the next cup, but my hands shook. My eyes kept flicking toward him, toward the man at the end booth. He didn't move. His presence didn't falter, but the air around him thickened. I felt it like a weight against my chest. Something was wrong, though I didn't know what or why. I told myself to leave it, to stay calm. But curiosity, reckless, foolish curiosity won over. I turned my head, just slightly, just enough to glimpse his face. And that was my first real mistake. I cannot describe what I saw, not fully. The shape of his eyes, the shadow beneath his hood, the way the light seemed to twist against him. It wasn't human, and yet it was. I blinked, and when I opened my eyes, he was the same, perfectly still. But the diner had shifted. The shadows were longer, darker, reaching toward me. The hum of the fridge became louder, almost a growl, and the scratch from the back room, it had multiplied. Now, it sounded like dozens of fingernails, scraping, tapping, moving closer. My throat went dry. I realized I had broken the first rule in more ways than one. The lights, the gaze, the impatience. I had not respected the rhythm, and the diner, patient until now, was reminding me. I turned back to the counter, hands shaking, trying to steady the coffee cup, trying to pretend nothing had happened. The man didn't move, didn't speak, but when I poured the cup, the liquid seemed to ripple unnaturally, reflecting shapes that didn't exist in the room. I blinked. They were gone. Or had they never been there? A whisper drifted through the diner. I couldn't tell if it was real or just my mind, frayed by too many hours alone. Rules, it said. Just that word. Soft, urgent, almost human, almost patient. I looked toward the back room, empty. Only the hum of the fridge, only the buzz of the fluorescent lights, only the distant highway wind. I stayed frozen at the counter until the man left, silently, exactly on the dot of 3:05 a.m. the second he moved. The tension lifted, the shadows retreated, the air became lighter. It was as if the diner itself exhaled, forgiving, or perhaps merely waiting. I cleaned the counter mechanically, wiped the syrup again, adjusted the lights to their perfect rhythm, repeating the rules in my head over and over, trying to convince myself that nothing had changed, but something had. I could feel it. Something had noticed, and it had cataloged my failure. That night, when I locked the back door and left the diner, the empty highway seemed somehow closer, pressing in around me. I kept my eyes down, my hands in my pockets, my mind running through every single rule, over and over. I knew now that the rules were not suggestions. They were the boundaries between the ordinary and whatever had been waiting for me at that end booth for 50 years. And I also knew one terrifying fact. Breaking them once meant that it would not forget. The nights had started blending together. I memorized the rhythm, recited the rules silently, and moved with careful precision around the diner. Still, the memory of the first violation haunted me like a shadow I couldn't outrun. I told myself it was a warning, nothing more. But warnings have a way of growing, of curling into your life until you feel their weight pressing into your chest. It was the third night of my second week. The diner was empty, save for the distant hum of the highway and the faint buzz of the neon sign. I had been cleaning the counter when I noticed a notebook tucked under the edge of the register. I didn't recognize it. It wasn't mine, but something about it made my hands twitch. I hesitated, aware of the rules. Number 6. Never write down what you see. It will disappear. Curiosity 1. I opened the notebook. The pages were filled with tiny, nearly illegible handwriting, notes about patrons, schedules, observations. Most of it seemed mundane until I reached a section labeled him. The description was meticulous. Every detail I had felt, every instinct I had ignored, was catalogued. The man's presence, the timing of his arrival, the pattern of the lights. One line made my stomach knot: "Do not speak his name, or the night takes note." I realized then that the rules were not arbitrary. They were shields. Each one existed for a reason I didn't yet fully understand, and breaking them invited attention from something that was far older than the diner itself. The man arrived at midnight, as usual, sliding into his booth without a sound. My heartbeat tightened against my ribs, each beat threatening to betray me. I kept my gaze down, focusing on the counter, the coffee cup, the rising steam, and then I heard it, the whispering from the back room. Not a scratch this time, not a single sound, but voices. Low, indistinct, chanting almost, but too muffled to understand. I froze, remembering the notebook, remembering the warning. I didn't look. I obeyed the rules. I prayed that was enough, and yet, the diner began to change. Shadows stretched, reaching like long fingers across the floor, pooling in the corners where my eyes dared not linger. The lights flickered, not broken, not erratic, but deliberate. I could feel the rhythm of the room shifting, matching his movements, his presence. Every small mistake, every hesitation from me, seemed magnified. The air was thick, humid with tension, and I realized with a growing panic that the rules were keeping more than me safe. They were keeping him contained. I poured the coffee at exactly midnight, keeping my hand steady despite the tremor in my fingers. The liquid swirled unnaturally in the cup, forming patterns that vanished if I stared too long. I didn't dare look up. The hum of the fridge became louder, then softer, then louder again, like a pulse matching the pace of something unseen in the shadows. Minutes stretched into eternity. I focused on the lights, the cups, the floor, the counter. I repeated the rules over and over, willing them to be more than words, willing them to be enough. And when the man finally stood, leaving the booth with his silent precision, the shadows receded, the air lightened, and the whispering from the back room stopped. I exhaled, though my chest still burned with adrenaline. I understood now that the rules weren't just instructions, they were lifelines. Disobeying them, even subtly, allowed the diner, or whatever inhabited it, to notice me, to test me, to mark me. I stayed behind the counter long after he left, cleaning and arranging, listening to the distant highway, letting the din of the neon buzz ground me. I thought about the notebook, the careful record of past employees, each one learning, failing, disappearing, and I realized that the diner itself was teaching me a lesson I didn't want to learn. Obey, or be consumed. By the time I left that night, the wind felt sharper, the shadows longer, and the highway quieter. I could still feel him, lingering in the empty diner, in the notes, in the rules I repeated under my breath. Every night, it became clearer. I was not working at a diner. I was working at a threshold, a boundary, and the man, the entity, was its measure, and somewhere, behind the back room door, the whispering waited. I hadn't meant to discover anything. That's the truth. I was supposed to follow the rules, survive the nights, and learn the rhythm of the diner. But curiosity has a way of creeping past fear, of nudging you toward the shadows you're meant to avoid. And on the fifth night, I found something I wish I hadn't. It started with the notebook I had found days earlier. I couldn't stop thinking about it. The careful records of someone who had survived before me. The entries were meticulous. Times, observations, descriptions of the man in the booth. One page caught my eye. The ink smudged, as if someone had cried over it. The words were simple, chilling. He has been here for 50 years. I do not know how, I do not know why. Obey, or leave. I tried to put it aside. Tried to tell myself that notes meant nothing, but the words dug into my mind. I went to the back room, where the whispers and scratches had become a constant, unavoidable presence. The door was unlocked, just as the rules demanded, though every instinct screamed at me to leave it alone. My hand hovered over the knob, the air thick, almost solid, as if the diner itself held its breath. Inside, I found old security monitors tucked beneath the counter, wires snaking like veins across the floor. Most of them were broken, flickering static, but a few were still active. On the screens, I saw what I first assumed were empty booths, until my eyes adjusted. Figures moved there, shadows of employees long gone, learning the rules, following them, failing them, and always, the man in the end booth, sitting perfectly still, observing. I realized then that these monitors weren't just cameras, they were windows. Windows into every night that had ever passed in this diner. Every misstep, every whispered failure. I scrolled through the footage, heart hammering, stomach twisting. One employee, a young woman with a nervous smile, appeared on screen. She had arrived eager, determined, unaware of the rules. She poured coffee before midnight. She looked at him. She spoke a single word in his direction. And then, nothing. The screen went blank, her booth empty, her chair perfectly aligned as if she had never been there. The diary entries had warned me, but seeing it, watching it, made it real. I felt the weight of 50 years pressing into the air, into the neon hum, into the smell of coffee and bleach and iron. This diner was older than the building, older than the highway, older than any explanation I could form. And the man was older still, patient, unchanging, observing every failure. I dug further, finding yellowed logs tucked beneath the monitors. They told a story, sparse and fragmented, of employees who had come and gone, some leaving voluntarily, most disappearing. Notes in the margins hinted at whispered warnings from the previous mentors. Men and women who had trained newcomers in the rules. Every mention of him, the constant customer, was the same. 50 years, same booth, same time, same patient silence. And then I found the first employee's note, folded carefully, left in a drawer. It was addressed to whoever came next. Do not break the rules, he notices, and he will remember. We are all shadows here, shadows of ourselves, shadows of the diner, shadows of those before us. You are safe only as long as you obey. Do not speak, do not look, do not linger. I realized something horrifying. The diner didn't just watch, it remembered. Every error, every hesitation, every glance. 50 years, and the man, the entity, was both jailer and constant. Never moving, never fading, unbroken by time. The back room had other things too. Old photographs, yellowed and curled. They showed the same booth, the same man, over decades. Each photo contained an employee, smiling nervously, frozen in mid. Some of the employees looked older in the next photo. Some vanished entirely, leaving only an empty chair, a coffee cup, a shadow where a body should have been. Time here was strange, distorted. The diner existed outside it, and the man at the booth was its center, its measure. I left the back room shaking, clutching the notebook. Every step toward the counter felt heavier, as though the diner itself knew I had seen too much. The man arrived at midnight, as usual, but this time, I noticed the air around him was thicker, darker, the shadow pooling beneath his hood, deeper than before. I obeyed the rules, pouring the coffee only after midnight, my hands trembling, repeating each rule silently, like a lifeline. I wanted to leave. I wanted to run, but I understood now that leaving wasn't an option, not really. The diner didn't let you leave. Not once it had marked you. All I could do was survive, follow the rules, learn the rhythm, and pray that the 50 years of patience behind that booth didn't extend to the night I broke my first rule. For the first time, I understood the true scale of the diner, the true danger of the man at the end booth, and the fragile thread I walked each night. I was not merely working a shift. I was existing in a carefully maintained balance, a fragile ritual older than any employee who had ever tried to survive, and one misstep, one glance, one whisper could unravel it all. That night, I arrived earlier than usual, drawn to the diner by a compulsion I couldn't name. The air outside was heavy with fog, the highway silent except for the occasional hum of a distant truck. I hesitated at the door, feeling it before I saw it. The diner itself seemed alive, watching, waiting. My hands shook as I pushed the door open, the familiar chime slicing through the thick silence. The man was already there. As always, seated in his booth, hood low, hands folded. But this time he shifted. Just slightly, imperceptibly, yet enough for me to feel it like a jolt of electricity through the floorboards. The diner pulsed around him, lights flickering in rhythm with some invisible heartbeat, shadows stretching toward him and retreating again. I tried to focus on the rules, repeating them silently, but my voice was weak even to my own ears. Never serve the first cup before midnight. Never speak his name. Never leave the counter. I had learned these lessons, but obedience alone wouldn't protect me now. Not when the diner itself seemed to surge with awareness, responding to some thought or impulse I could not comprehend. The clock ticked toward midnight. I poured the coffee, hands trembling. Steam rose in unnatural spirals, reflecting shadows that moved independently of the room. Then I heard it, a whispering faint at first, then louder, closer, coming from the corners, the ceiling, the walls themselves. Rules, 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 it chanted, unintelligible, but urgent. Something shifted behind me, in the back room. My stomach dropped. I hadn't seen anyone enter, yet the air had changed heavier, warmer, pressing against my back like a living weight. I dared not look, dared not turn, but I could feel it moving, circling, measuring me, and then it struck, not physically, not yet, but psychologically, like the diner itself had become a predator. My heart raced, my breath caught in my throat. The first strike was subtle. A chair scraped across the floor by itself, slow, deliberate, drawing my attention. I looked down at the cup in my hands, noticing the coffee swirling faster than gravity should allow, steam coiling like fingers. The lights flickered violently, then steadied, only to pulse again. I realized, with a cold clarity, that I was being tested, pushed, probed. Then came the sound, footsteps, slow, dragging, approaching from the corner near the back room. I froze. There was no one there, yet the rhythm of the steps echoed across the linoleum, distinct, deliberate, hunting. I swallowed, tried to move, but my body felt locked in place, bound by the rules I had barely begun to understand. And then I saw it, not fully, not entirely, but its presence manifested as a shadow darker than the night itself, pooling beneath the booth. It stretched toward me, not moving like a human, but flowing, shifting, impossible. The man, my patient, silent observer, was now not just at the booth. He was everywhere, in the air, in the lights, in the walls. I could feel his awareness pressing into my skull, demanding attention, testing obedience, measuring fear. Panic surged. I almost broke the rules instinctively, almost spoke, almost turned, almost blinked at him directly. Each near mistake was punished subtly at first, a flicker of lights, a low whisper, a pressure at the base of my spine, but escalating. The diner itself seemed to pulse in response to my hesitation, reminding me that I was not in control. I backed toward the counter, trying to follow every rule, trying to remain invisible in the rhythm of the diner. The shadow moved faster now, circling, probing, forcing me to anticipate, forcing me to obey. I felt it in my chest, in my bones, a presence ancient, patient, unyielding. I understood then that the man was not human in the sense I understood, and yet his patience, his silence, had allowed him to endure. to wait for anyone foolish enough to breach the rules. The backroom door slammed open on its own. I stumbled, gripping the counter, eyes darting toward the sound. A low metallic scraping filled the diner, as if fingernails had traveled across every surface simultaneously. Shadows reached toward me, clawing at the edges of my vision. I whispered the rules, trying to hold the line, trying to anchor myself to the safety they provided. And then he appeared fully, impossibly, rising from the end booth with a fluidity no human should have, who'd drawn back, but the face I could not comprehend it. It shifted, flickering like static, both familiar and alien. A grin, or the suggestion of one, stretched across features that weren't fully human. I froze, hands on the counter, heart hammering against my ribs. "You should not have looked," he whispered, a voice that was everywhere and nowhere. The diner seemed to tighten around me, lights pulsing in rhythm with my terror. The shadows surged forward, pressing me into the counter. I obeyed, recited the rules silently, trying to exist without error. Survival was a balance on the edge of a blade, and the edge was trembling beneath me. Minutes or hours passed. I could not tell. The man returned to his booth, shadows receding, whispers fading, but the diner did not relax. It had measured me, marked me, and remembered. I had survived, barely, and I understood something I had not before. The danger was not just in breaking the rules, it was in existing, in being seen, in being human. That night, when I left the diner, the air outside felt thin, brittle, as if the fog itself were holding its breath. Behind me, the neon buzzed faintly, and for a moment, I could swear I saw the shadow at the window, waiting, patient, counting the minutes until midnight. I had survived, but I had also been seen, and being seen meant I was now part of the diner's memory, part of the 50-year record. The mornings had begun to feel wrong. Even after surviving the night, my body refused to relax. My dreams were filled with shadows stretching across the diner, whispering rules I had never heard. I tried to tell myself it was just fatigue, but deep down, I knew better. That night, my mentor, the man behind the counter, the keeper of rules, appeared later than usual. His absence unnerved me more than the entity ever had. The diner felt hollow, echoes stretching across the empty booths. When he finally arrived, he moved with the same deliberate calm, but his eyes flickered strangely, restless, unsteady. Something was off. "Follow the rules," he said softly, almost too softly, as if rehearsed, but there was a tension in his voice that made the words feel like warnings, not guidance. I nodded, forcing myself to focus. Yet a strange thought gnawed at me. What is he hiding? I decided to check the back room again. The notebook, the security monitors, the yellowed logs, they were all still there, waiting. But tonight, I noticed something I hadn't before. A hidden drawer beneath the counter. It was small, almost invisible, and locked with a rusted key. My mentor had never mentioned it. Curiosity, or perhaps desperation, led me to pick at the lock. My hands trembled as it gave way. Inside, I found photographs, notes, and most horrifyingly old recordings of the mentor himself. They showed him teaching employees, just as he had taught me, yet the tone was different, crueler, insistent. One recording played on its own, static buzzing softly, then a whisper, "They must obey. Every misstep counts. They are for him." I realized then, with chilling clarity, that my mentor had not just been guiding me. He had been complicit. He had ensured the survival of some, the demise of others, selecting who lived and who disappeared, all under the guise of teaching rules. His calm demeanor, his quiet instructions, they were not acts of protection. They were acts of control, obedience to the diner's entity. I confronted him quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. "Why didn't you tell me everything?" My words trembled in the silence of the diner. His eyes met mine, and for a moment, I thought I saw regret. Then he smiled, the first true smile, I had ever seen from him, and it was cold, sharp. I told you exactly what you needed to know. Everything else would only make it worse. It wasn't comfort. It wasn't reassurance. It was betrayal. I realized I had been nothing more than a pawn, trained to follow rules for someone else's unknown purpose. My mentor, the one who had seemed human, fallible, guiding me through the peril of the nights, had been hiding from me the true cost of disobedience and the true identity of the entity at the booth. The realization hit harder than the entity ever had. Every instruction, every gentle correction, every repetition of the rules he had been shaping me, testing me, preparing me. But for what? Survival, yes, but also compliance, submission. And the man at the booth, the one who had watched for 50 years, had him too. My mentor had been an agent of the diner's memory, serving the rules as much as the entity itself. I wanted to leave, I wanted to flee, but the diner, the entity, the shadows, they wouldn't allow it. And now, knowing my mentor's betrayal, I understood another terrifying truth. Obedience alone might not be enough. Knowledge, experience, survival, none of it mattered if the human guiding me could not be trusted. That night, as the man entered the booth at midnight, I kept my gaze down, hands steady, coffee poured with perfect timing. My mentor stood behind the counter, silent, watching me, watching us both. I could feel the tension between them, the invisible thread connecting the man at the booth and the one I had trusted. My mentor wasn't a savior. He was a facilitator, a participant in the endless cycle, bound by fear, bound by loyalty to a force older than any human reckoning. The encounter left me shaken, more aware than ever of my vulnerability. Every flicker of light, every shadow, every whisper became magnified. I couldn't trust the rules entirely, nor the person who had taught them. Survival now depended not just on obeying, but on understanding the delicate balance between mentor, diner, and entity, a balance I was not sure I could maintain. As the night drew on, I realized something I could not ignore. Betrayal had a taste, sharp, metallic, lingering, and now I had tasted it. The nights had grown unbearable. The diner was no longer just a workplace. It was a crucible, a place where time, fear, and rules collided into a single, suffocating rhythm. My mentor's betrayal still echoed in my mind, a cold reminder that I could trust no one, not even the one who had taught me to survive. And yet, I was trapped. I had learned the rules. I had memorized the rhythms. And if I failed now, I wouldn't just fail myself. That night, I arrived early, feeling every muscle taut with anticipation. The highway fog pressed against the windows, the neon sign buzzing a warning I couldn't ignore. Inside, the diner felt heavier than usual, almost breathing, almost alive. I stayed behind the counter, hands folded, waiting, repeating the rules silently like prayers. The man arrived exactly at midnight. His presence filled the diner instantly, shadows pooling beneath him, pressing into every corner. I obeyed, pouring the coffee only after midnight, my gaze carefully lowered, movements precise. But tonight, there was a new awareness in the air. Something sharper, almost sentient, almost accusing. From the back room, the whispers started, soft at first, growing louder, surrounding me, almost chanting. Rules, rules, rules. I felt the shadows surge toward me, heavier, more aggressive, almost impatient. My heart hammered against my ribs, my palms slick with sweat. I realized something terrifying. The entity wasn't just observing, it was testing me, waiting for me to break, to hesitate, to fail. I glanced at my mentor, standing silently behind the counter. His face was unreadable, calm, distant. But I knew the truth now. He would not intervene. He might guide, he might instruct, but when the diner demanded compliance, he would let it unfold. Survival was mine, or the diner's. And then I saw it, a pattern in the shadows, a rhythm I hadn't noticed before, the flicker of the lights, The flow of the coffee steam, the pulse of the neon, it was a language, a measure, a path. Following it could protect me. Ignoring it could destroy me. I had learned enough to understand the choice. Obey blindly, or risk breaking something that had endured for 50 years. I made my decision. I moved deliberately, synchronizing my movements to the unseen rhythm, pouring the coffee, adjusting the lights, correcting every flicker, obeying the rules in their strictest sense. The shadows surged, testing, probing, curling around my feet, my legs, my arms, but I did not falter. My mentor's gaze followed me, distant, yet approving in some hidden way, but I did not meet it. My attention was fixed entirely on survival, on the rhythm, on the entity. Then came the final test. From the back room, a shape emerged, fluid, impossible, stretching, reaching toward me. The whispers became words, almost intelligible. Break, fail, look. Panic surged. But I remembered the notebook, the observations, the past employees who had survived by obedience. I ignored the whispers, ignored the instinct to run, to speak, to look directly. I focused entirely on the rhythm, on the rules. Time warped. Seconds felt like hours. Shadows advanced, then retreated. The entity at the booth remained patient, unblinking, observing my every heartbeat. I moved, careful, precise, and finally, the air shifted. The tension lifted, just slightly, as if the diner itself exhaled. I had passed the test, or at least survived it. My mentor finally spoke, low and calm, almost a murmur. Few endure this long. His words were both acknowledgement and warning. I realized that survival was temporary, obedience was fragile. The diner was patient, but it did not forgive easily. And then came the final decision, the hardest of all. Leave now and risk exposure, knowing the diner could follow me, mark me, pull me back. Stay, continue the ritual, trapped in this endless cycle, but safe as long as I obeyed. Or break one ultimate rule, confront the man, and risk everything for the chance of freedom. I chose neither. I stayed at the counter, coffee poured, lights. Steady, repeating the rules, silently praying that patience, precision, and the knowledge I had gained would allow me to survive the nights ahead. But somewhere deep, in the corners of the diner, I could feel it, the patient, eternal presence, watching, waiting. I knew my choice was temporary, that the cycle was endless, and that one mistake could undo everything. I left the diner briefly, that night, stepping into the highway fog, only to feel the pull of the neon, the hum of the lights, the invisible weight of the man in the booth. Survival was not freedom. It was existence within the rhythm, an obedience measured in shadows, whispers, and 50-year patience. And as I returned to the diner, I understood a horrifying truth. The rules were not just instructions. They were a covenant, a sentence. And breaking them, even unknowingly, could mean something worse than death. Morning came, like it always did, too bright, too quiet, too normal. The fog had thinned, the sun weakly spilling through the diner's windows, but the light didn't feel right anymore. It painted everything in pale colors, washed out, almost unreal. My mentor was gone. No note, no trace. Just his apron folded neatly on the counter, as if he'd never existed. The coffee pot was still warm, though I hadn't touched it since before dawn, and the booth, his booth, was empty. For the first time, I let myself look, really look. The leather seat was worn smooth, almost polished, from decades of use. The cup sat untouched, steam rising, though I hadn't poured it, and carved deep into the tabletop were faint marks, not scratches, but words. Obey, wait. He returns when called. I froze. My reflection in the window caught my eye, pale, trembling. But as I looked closer, I realized something was wrong with it. The reflection didn't move when I did. It sat there, still, at the booth, watching me. My breath hitched. I blinked and my reflection was gone. The booth was empty again. I should have left right then. I should have run, but my feet wouldn't move. I was drawn to that booth, to the faint warmth on the vinyl, the lingering smell of black coffee. My hand brushed the table. The surface pulsed once, faintly, like a heartbeat. The air thickened. The diner's neon sign outside flickered once, twice, and then steadied into a low red hum that bled through the windows. I knew that color. It was the same one that filled the diner every midnight. Only now, it was morning. Somewhere behind me, the bell above the door chimed. My stomach turned to ice. Slowly, I turned toward the sound. A figure stood in the doorway. Not the man from the booth. Not exactly. Taller, thinner, features blurred by the haze of sunlight cutting through the glass. But I recognized the posture, the stillness, the patience. He moved toward the booth without a word, sat down, folded his hands, waited. My instincts screamed at me to run, to hide, to flee into the daylight. But instead, I found myself reaching for the coffee pot. My hands moved automatically, measured, precise. I poured. The cup filled, steam curling upward, identical to every night before. I glanced at the clock. Midnight. But it couldn't be. The sun was still shining. The light outside dimmed in an instant, the highway vanishing into the dark. The neon sign flared back to life, humming in perfect rhythm. My reflection reappeared in the window, only now, it wasn't mine, it was his dot. And as I placed the cup before the man, he finally spoke. His voice was quiet, deep, steady. "Your shift starts now." The words echoed through the diner, soft and final. The coffee steamed between us. The clock ticked backward. Somewhere in the back room, the notebook flipped open on its own, a new page waiting to be written.